Penguin Random House Audio presents The Possession of Alba Díaz by Isabel Cañas, read for you by Carolina Hoyos and Anthony Ray Perez. For my story, Doctor, aren't you thrilled that the first book I dedicated solely to you is the grisliest one yet?
But it is a circumstance worthy of much consideration, that the wisdom of our eternal Lord has enriched the most remote parts of the world, inhabited by the most uncivilized people, and has placed there the greatest number of minds that ever existed, in order to invite men to seek out and possess those lands, and coincidentally to communicate their religion and the worship of the true God to men who do not know it. Hence we see that the lands in the Indies that are richest in minds and wealth have been those most advanced in the Christian religion in our time, and thus the Lord takes advantage of our desires to serve his sovereign ends. In this regard, a wise man once said that what a man does to marry off an ugly daughter is give her a large dowry. This is what God has done with that rugged land, endowing it with great wealth and mines, so that whoever wished could find it by this means. Hence there is great abundance of mines in the Indies, mines of every metal, copper, iron, lead, tin, quicksilver, silver, and gold. José de Acosta, Historia Natural y Moral de las Indias, 1590.
1. I'd wager you haven't heard the legend of the Monterrubio mine. Most haven't, especially if they're not from around Mina San Gabriel. It's a rumor, really, whispered from ear to ear, passed from palm to palm like so much silver. It was an ancient terror, I've heard people say, or a pagan devil rising from the dark maw of the mine to devour all in its path. Some say it was a haunting. If you ask me, that's too straightforward. Can you imagine if this were nothing but a ghost story, full of cold draughts and shadows where they oughtn't be, clammy palms and sweaty napes? That's too clean a tale, too simple. And this one gets messy. For they say that Alba Díaz de Bolaños barely survived. They say that when she stumbled down the cathedral steps, she was alive. Yes, she was screaming, and all of Zacatecas heard it, their breasts chilled by how shredded and raw her voice was. But her wedding gown and all its silver was slick with blood, gleaming with it, profane and red as cinnabar, wet as afterbirth. Some say no one has seen her since. I have. And unlike the storytellers who have mangled these events over the years, I know what happened. The truth is worse than the stories would have you believe. I once heard it said that the words themselves are cursed, that the tale, once told, will evaporate like mercury. I can't know that for certain. Perhaps it will. So lean in, listen closely. I won't be repeating myself.
2. Elías. Not long ago, in a land far from here, Elías Monterrubio found a book of spells. Or perhaps it found him. In a shadowed corner of a book bazaar, before a stall stacked with manuscripts, he paused. The air around him swam with foreign tongues and the cries of Bosporus gulls, and the harsh slant of noon, and the smells of men who had traveled far under summer's sun. But at once, all went still. Softness fell around him, leather-bound and unassuming, as these texts always are. El Libro de San Cipriano seemed to reach for him more than he reached for it. Now Elias's studies of alchemy had taken him from the familiar spires of Sevilla and the chop of Gibraltar to this far side of the Mediterranean. He was a learned man. He had come across the name before. Before he forswore his black craft and turned to God, San Cipriano was a sorcerer omnipotent, the greatest enchanter to ever light a candle and pray. His was not a showy craft, leveling mountains or levitating to impress princes for jewels and coin, but one of quiet incantations. Love was all he wanted, and so love was what he spun spells for. Love was what San Cipriano's followers chanted invocations for, even after the sorcerer left the lies of the occult behind and fixed his attention on the promise of life everlasting. An alchemist's mind is weights and scales. The romance of transmutation is stripped bare to equations, charcoal figures scribbled on blank paper, a lingering cough from chemical fumes. Love and its spells, as far as Elías was concerned, were as much a myth as San Cipriano. But still, he paused. Perhaps it was because the title on the first page was written in Aljamia, Spanish words and Arabic ligatures, an ancient marriage of his twin mother tongues. That alone was rare. A curiosity. A souvenir from a time long dead. He bought it, slipped it into his bag, and then he forgot about it. For late that evening, as the call to prayer rippled midsummer's humidity like the gentle strum of an oud, a letter arrived at his workshop. "Your father has returned," it read. "Come." Many weeks later, Elías cursed himself for taking the bait. Of course, he told himself that he meant to return to Spain anyway, that he had to, on behalf of his circle of scholars. Hadn't they all agreed that it would be easier for Elías to obtain their mercury from Sevilla than for any of them? It was logic, cold as metal. Elías knew Almedén and the black markets of Sevilla intimately. The arrival of his grandfather's letter merely hastened the planning. And the idea of speaking to his father for the first time in over 20 years, he hated that it drew at him. He hated how much he wanted it. He hated how questions and accusations spiraled themselves deep into his uneasy sleep on the ship that departed the sea of Marmara's calm waters for the docks of Barcelona. Why did you stop writing? Why did you never return? He was cagey and jumpy on the road. He carried his friend's fortune sewn into his clothes. He barely slept. He spoke to no one. All he needed was to make it to Sevilla, visit the mercury dealers from Almedén, and pay his respects to his family. Face his father. Then he could turn his back on the man like he deserved, and return to sea. Before Elías knew it, he would be bound east, praying that no corsairs sank or captured him and the mercury en route to Constantinople. Then life would resume as before. He could bury his father in his mind and never sleep fitfully again. He knew from years of travel that no trip was ever simple. He did not expect simplicity, especially not when the sun set over Sevilla's winding streets and he entered the dark, dust-filled house of the Monterrubio patriarch, Juan Arcadio. Still, when he sat in the drawing room and asked after his father, he did not expect what his grandfather said. "Victoriano died in the Indies 6 months ago." Abuelo Arcadio replied flatly. The drop was dark and sudden, the slam of a door and profound silence in its wake. Elías opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. He leaned forward to put his head in his hands. No, his father couldn't be dead. He'd come all this way. He stood abruptly, strode 3 paces to the door, then whirled on his grandfather. He pointed a finger at the old man, a silent accusation before he could find speech. "You wrote." "Don't look at me like that, boy.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?